That is to monitor and mine the media, to ensure that the media, to monitor, mine, and to ensure that the media provides for a decent and acceptable portrayal of people of color, in particular, people of African descent. On a regular basis, we monitor not only the stories told to you on television and heard on radio, read in the newspaper, we monitor how the professional development of our members are, the development of those members in the job market. But our effort this evening is a special task, and that is to engage the community in helping us to do a better job. Eric?
What we're going to do is just screen a portion of this new newscast, and then we'll sort of dissect how the anchor person introduced the stories, how she tagged how the reporter reported on the story. And we don't need to do the whole broadcast just to give you an example, because you don't have to watch the whole broadcast just to get a sense of what's going on. In fact, there's a very interesting story today on Bernard Getz being sued in the civil court for $50 million by Darrell Cavey, and that would make a perfect example of one of the stories that we can go ahead and try to dissect. So what we watched, like the top 3 news stories, and then work on presentations.
For many centuries.
C-SPAN, the show's going to come up right behind that.
The man who calls himself a child molesting demon was released from a Texas prison this morning. Larry McQuay admits molesting more than 200 children and says he will strike again if he's not castrated. But prison officials say McQuay will have to get the operation on his own after he is released. McQuay will go to a San Antonio halfway house where he will be monitored by an electronic bracelet. Meanwhile, police are investigating other abuse cases to see if they can put McQuay back in prison. We're supposed to get another dose of winter in April tomorrow morning. Craig Allen's in the Weather Center with the latest. Craig.
Can you believe it? One more time, McGee. We had anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of slush around parts of the region this morning, and 4 or more north and west of the city, remarkably enough. Now, you take a look at the satellite picture here, and you'll see there are breaks just to the southwest of the city. We're trying to get a few breaks in the clouds over Midtown right now. So the rest of today turns out okay. But on Earthwatch, watch what happens now. Here you have the clouds and a little break or two of sunshine during the day today. Watch that low-pressure system coming up from the bottom of your screen. It will move to off the coastline by tomorrow afternoon, and here we go again with more wet snow in the forecast. Complete forecast details coming up a little bit later on. McGee?
Okay, thanks, Craig. Up next, the reclusive Bernhard Getz is forced out into the public spotlight once again. We're going to tell you why New York's subway gunman could soon be in big financial trouble, depending on what a Bronx jury decides. Grateful Dead legend Jerry Garcia has gone to his final resting place in a secret ceremony 8 months after his death. Plus, the rush to save lives down under as a tourist train suddenly drops from the sky into the sea.
He made that quite...
Original all-natural energizer.
I didn't even know I had a soul in my foot. I have diabetes, and sometimes you just can't feel these things. No matter what my doctors tried, the sore just wouldn't heal. Really got to thank the person who told me about the wound care center.
Pay very close attention to the introduction.
Staff
The
were
story,
very
the commercial comes
professional.
up.
They gave me an individualized treatment program that worked. Now I'm back to running around doing my errands. The wound care center made all the difference.
Call 1-800-976-1414.
Animal activists want this horse race stopped.
Omicron of horse dying and drawing into
Now, hard copy investigates the most extreme of equestrian events.
The horse stepped on my chest last night.
Steep runs, winding rapids, obstacles, or death traps to helpless horses.
Too many horses are dying.
See why it's called a suicide race. Then, who to call when you suspect your sweetie is stepping out? The Infidelity Files on hard copy.
Tonight at 7 on New York Channel 2.
When I was young, I just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. But I've never been on a diet in my life. Equal is so super. You just put a little of it in your coffee and it's tastes just like natural sugar.
Equal. No calories, no saccharin.
So it's cool.
12 years after he shot 4 people on a New York City subway, Bernhard Goetz is back in court this noon. Goetz is being sued for $50 million by Darrell Cavey, who was paralyzed in the shooting. Channel 2's Mike Taibbi is live at Bronx Supreme Court. Mike.
Yeah, McGee, in a raw day in the Bronx, the beginning of what might be the final chapter of the Bernie Goetz saga. The preliminaries today, the jury selection begins on Wednesday for this civil suit. It all goes back to an incident which is famous and now part of New York lore. 12 years ago, December 22nd, 1984, Bernie Goetz gets on a downtown IRT subway train. He is set upon by what he says are 4 muggers who are trying to shake him down for $5. He pulls out an illegal Smith & Wesson nickel-plated .38 and opens fire. And according to his statement and mythology about this, he then says to one of the men who's down, Darrell Cavey, "You don't look so bad, have another," and fires away, paralyzing the youth. This is the lawsuit William Kunstler had represented the Cavey family. Now it's Ron Kuby. We heard from him a while back, and we also heard from a rambling Bernhard Goetz.
Bernhard Goetz was motivated by racism. He made that quite clear. And he took out an illegal handgun, walked up to a young man who posed no threat to him, said, "You don't look so bad, here's another one," and fired a shot point blank into his back, severing his spine. It's something that I don't want to do, but I have the choice of either making a summary judgment or fighting it. We chose to fight it.
Bernhard Goetz says that he doesn't have $50 million. He went through $250,000 of an estate that he inherited, but he does expect to fight this. He expects the trial to last between 10 days and 3 weeks. In the Bronx, by the way, jury verdicts 79% in favor of plaintiffs, much higher than 57% nationwide. The trial begins, as I say, with jury selection on Wednesday. This is Mike Taibbi reporting live from the Bronx. Back to the studio.
Thank you very much, Mike. Dramatic rescue of several Japanese tourists after their plane crashed off the Australian coast Easter Sunday. One woman is in critical condition. 9 other tourists are listed in good condition. Their plane crashed on a rocky shore off the New South Wales-Queensland border. Within moments of the crash, witnesses ignored their own safety, running and swimming to the scene and pulling those aboard to safety. Police say the plane broke apart, which actually made the rescue
How do you
easier.
stop it?
No, not but at least it will be shown.
All right. So you had 2 stories that had fairly lengthy reports on it. One was the anchor voiceover of the child molester that was in jail. I'll close that door. Voiceover of the file video by the anchor of the child molester who was about to be released and monitored, and the one about the civil suit against Bernhard Goetz. In the first story, basically what you saw was file footage. There was no reporter on the scene. They basically, in a sense, brushstroked that story and said pretty much this man's going to get out. He says he's going to commit these crimes again, but they're going to let him out anyway, and if he needs to be castrated, he'd have to get the operation himself. You never got a sense, really, of why would the man want to be castrated. Did anybody get any sense of why he would want to be castrated out of that voiceover? And the reason why he didn't was because they didn't go into any depth about it. The man understands that what he has is a major illness, he can't control it, and he has voluntarily asked to be castrated so that he does not put any other children in danger. That didn't come across from that report because they just didn't give you enough background and enough depth on the story. That's just a pure lack of professional, in-depth reporting that really had nothing to do with any sway or any bias. But that happens quite a bit in news reporting, and that's something that you have to keep in mind at all times. There are a number of issues that could have been raised about that story, which is, why wouldn't the state grant the man his wish if that will keep his children safe? Why would the state say, yes, we're going to release him anyway, and then we'll spend the money monitoring the electronic bracelet? And why would the state put the burden of him having to request an operation that he probably can't afford anyway? So those are some of the issues. That's what they do when they brushstroke stories that are in the news and still try to give you the news without really giving you the news in depth. Now, on the in-depth story on guests that they tried to do, and I say try because they didn't do too good a job on that one either. If you go back to the bumper that McGee Hickey said about the stories coming up, she referred to the recluse Bernard Getz is going to be back in the spotlight again. Now that's a choice of words by whoever wrote the copy for the anchor person. All anchor people don't write their own copy. Writers do that. Sometimes they edit it, sometimes they change it, sometimes they write their own. She could have had any number of choices. Bernard Getz is a convicted felon. Okay? She could have said, convicted felon Bernard Getz will be back in court again. Keep that in mind. My 27 years in the news business shown me that had Bernard Getz been black or Hispanic, you would not have had recluse Bernard Getz will be back in the public eye. You would have had probably at the least convicted felon Bernard Getz.
Oh, you picked up
Keep those in mind. You picked up on all these nice little subtleties that aren't so subtle. That's correct. What happens is the spin when the perpetrators and or actual people who commit these crimes are people of color, the spin is always skewed to the negative. There is no such thing as a recluse. When OJ is referred to, he's going to be accused murderer or acquitted murderer, not former athlete O.J. Simpson. You're never going to get any of the positives in those kinds of approaches. Those are the things that will always come up. Those are the things you have to be sensitive to. Now, within the actual report itself, Mike Tybee is a veteran reporter. I know him actually personally. He used to work at ABC Network before he went to WCBS Local. And he's done a number of stories about people of color. He was WCBS's prime reporter on the Tawana Brawley case. I think he actually wrote a book on his interpretation and spin on that particular case after it was all over. So I watch Mike Tybee real carefully when he reports, because if you recall, we can replay it again so you can listen more carefully, when he said, according to his statement, and he added another phrase, and to folklore or mythology on this, he walked up to the young man and said, "You don't look too bad, here's another one for you." Well, when you hear according to his statement, you know that the man said what he said he said. When you add according to mythology, you then have two things, a statement and mythology, all put together. Now, what did you just hear? What do you come away from that with? Is it an actual statement about what the man said, or is it some speculative kind of comment that's grown up around this story? Well, I can tell you for a fact that the first part of the statement is correct, according to Bernard Getz's statement. And that means these are words out of Bernard Getz's own mouth. He indeed walked up to this young man who had already been shot and was face down and said, "You don't look so bad, here's another one," whatever the exact quote is. I know he said it because I've seen the exact transcript of the statement he made to the police in New Hampshire. He didn't make the statement to New York police. He made it to New Hampshire police, where they extradited him from. But it is a statement of record. When his lawyer says Bernard Getz walked up and shot a man who could do him no harm, and the kid could do him no harm because he'd already been shot, and he was laying face down, and his back was to Bernard Getz. And so when he pumped those bullets into his back, he really was causing him serious bodily harm, that he was no longer in danger of his life. So those are parts of the reporting within the story itself that you have to be aware of. Now, you can't know all of that if you're not privy to some of that information about the statements, but you listen carefully to what the reporter said, and then you can dissect it. Well, he said, according to his statement, So the question is, well, did Bernard Goetz really say this? Well, yes, Bernard Goetz really did say that. Because not only did the reporter tell you, according to Bernard Goetz's statement, he did say that, Bernard Goetz's lawyer, who they put up on the screen, Ronald Kuby, came back out and told you again. And they did not contradict Ronald Kuby and didn't say it was an alleged statement, which are some of the phrases they would use. Some other uses of language that you need to be aware of, because that was a very ticklish story. If that's okay for me to dissect this a little more. That was a very ticklish story in that you grew up in New York, you ride the subways, you were as sensitive to subway crime and mugging as anybody else in your city. And so, I know I am. I tell you, I mean, I ride the subways very carefully, and I'm not at all happy when I see a group of folk coming at me, young folk, moving in groups, okay? And I get into a very defensive posture. I don't care whether they're white, black, green, Hispanic, or whatever. The nature of the business is survival, and you have to be aware at all times. So I don't ask for trouble. I don't kind of run away and look scared. I just go about my business, but I go about it in a very aware posture so that I don't look as if I'm an easy prey and they don't think that they should be thinking about doing anything to me. In Bernard Goetz's case, these young men actually did not necessarily accost him, they did approach him as a group. And see, that's a phrase that Mike Taibbi straddled. He said he was set upon, that's the phrase he used, by a group of young men he alleged were muggers. Now what do you have there? You have another split use of language. In one phrase he's telling you these youngsters set upon Bernie Goetz. The other half of the same phrase he says Bernard Goetz alleged were muggers. And the reason why he said that is to try to be accurate, because he understands from the history of the case that the way those young men approached Bernard Goetz was kind of semi-shakedown and semi, could you let us have $5? It was almost as if they were saying, please, and if you don't give us the $5, we may go away. But it doesn't matter. The fact that they approached him meant that they really were trying to get something from him. Follow me? Now, the question is, if he said, no, I don't have $5, would they actually, because they had a screwdriver. One of them had a screwdriver in his pocket. And he was the ringleader of the four group. And he did have a record of petty theft. And the reason he had that screwdriver is because they had ripped off vending machines in the subway before. And so we know that these weren't any innocent kids just walking around, you know, just panhandling per se. They were going to probably try to get $5 from this guy if he was willing to give him $5. If he said, no, I don't have it, and moved down the subway car, so everybody else moved down to the subway car. That's the other thing to the history of the story you may not recall, because it was 12 years ago. Everybody just said, well, you know, they don't look too sensible, so they just moved to the end of the car. Bernard Goetz sat right there by himself at that end where those kids were, because he knew he had his gun. And you see what he already had been mugged before, he already had his own plan of action in mind. And that's fine in that he did pull out his gun to defend himself when he thought he was being mugged, which he could interpret that, and I would not dispute that. Somebody asks you for $5, they're either panhandling or they're trying to shake you down, one or the other. Having pulled the gun out, he could have made them walk away, or he could have walked away. But he didn't. And that's why you now have a $50 million suit against Bernard Goetz. And that's why you have Bernard Goetz as a convicted felon who served, what, 7 months?
8 months.
8 months for possession of an illegal weapon, because not only did he pull it out, he used it. He had no permit for it, and then he used it. Go ahead.
Why, if once he shot the guy and he was already face down, why wasn't there like a separate charge? Because obviously he wasn't in, you know, in any immediate danger.
Well, what they did was the trial didn't deal with him as an assault. they let him, his lawyer got him off on the fact that he was defending himself from a mugging. But because of that second statement, go ahead, Agnes.
They charged him with attempted murder.
Right, but he beat that rap.
Right, exactly.
See?
They did charge him?
Oh, yeah.
Like, so he went
Yeah.
to court and everything?
He went to court, he was tried. The best they could get him on was for possession of the illegal weapon because his lawyer claimed and a jury agreed that he was defending himself against would-be muggers. But because of the nature of Darrell Cavy's position and the fact that he was no longer capable of inflicting any harm on Bernard Goetz, prior to Bernard Goetz bending over and saying what he said, "You don't look too bad, here's another one for you." That's why the family filed this particular suit. And there was some discrepancy as to how many of these kids were indeed trying to mug Bernard Goetz, whether it was just a ringleader, whether Cavey was just an easily led kid who just happened to be hanging with the wrong people at the wrong time, which has been known to happen. And unfortunately, sometimes you were running with the wrong crowd and you can get yourself into some serious trouble, which he did. Now, if you would like to see that again and listen to the language again so you get a sense of what we just discussed, I'm more than happy to play that again. You want to go back to it? Okay.
No, the other way. The first one. The first one is not on. You may want to push it forward or
Rewind it.
because I rewound
Late
it.
70s and 80s.
Went all the way to the top, okay.
And that's not
Slush around parts of the region this morning, and 4 or
From the sky into the
Let's see, we go back to the bumper.
Eric, if you should take the volume down, there's something I'd like to add since we're coming to second.
the Germans and the French were at it for many centuries. And
Because this is television, the writer has to write with the picture and use the words. And so that's an obvious statement, but it's not so obvious a statement. Okay. Even with this story, as Eric mentioned, this is file footage of 1993. This man has been in the news now for the past weekend, since before. There's no reason why they're doing it like this. This is getting a soft touch.
No job.
Today is Monday, and it's time to get back to business. The holidays are over. This man made a request. It's been denied. Instead of going and having a today report or a last night report with him, they went to the file. And so you have this very soft story of this one man. You don't see any of his victims. You don't see any angry faces. You don't see anything that conjures up in you this feeling, a negative feeling. Now it's just this man has served his time. He's coming out. He wanted to do something. He didn't get any cooperation. End of story. It's now left up to you to follow the details. The Bernard Goetz story. Okay, here's.
subway gunman could soon be in big financial
Check out the
trouble.
visual on this. What picture do you see up here? You see him in a very contemporary role. He's a man of action. He's got on his white shirt. He's smiling. He's able to talk.
Yeah, you don't see him going away in handcuffs.
You don't, exactly.
Any of the stuff that you normally see our folks.
So you see this man, his business is going on, and he's a part of the business. And the shots of him, it's not a frozen picture of him. There's no flashback to 1984 and so on. That's called a tease. Eric calls it a bumper. Bumper in television. I'm a radio person. So we call it a tease, they call it a bump. It's the lead and it's the thing that has you waiting for the rest of the story. The rest of the story, usually with people of color, you have...
Up next, the reclusive Bernard Goetz is worked out in the spotlight once again. We're going to tell you why New York's subway gunman could soon be in big financial trouble. depending on what a Bronx jury decides. Grateful Dead legend Jerry Garcia.
New York
has done
subway gunman. Now, does she say that as if what he did may have been sort of not too good? What was her inflection? How did she sound?
Like he was a subway rider.
He sounded like a semi-hero to her?
And a businessman, he'd be in deep financial trouble,
Yes.
you know, sympathy.
It wasn't Colin Ferguson kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
The man.
That's it, sort of, except that those kids were asking for trouble.
Yeah.
See, now, not to the extent that Bernard Getz reacted, in my estimation, and what came out in the transcripts. He was looking for trouble, because what he did was he stationed himself in a position, in a stance of readiness to be affronted so that he could respond.
Yeah.
And his response was far beyond what was necessary to make those kids move on. And that's why he's now in court being sued for $50 million. That's why Darrell Cavy's in a wheelchair.
Now, with the story and how it's told to you, the project that we are asking you to participate in, and thank you very much, Professor Belcon, for including us in your, it's going to be fun because for the next, 2 weeks? Next 2 weeks, you'll have a chance to look at the news as it's presented to you, not to bring you up to date on what's happening, times and places, but how it's actually presented.
Do we have a choice as to channels that we'll be able to watch, or do we have to watch what you know?
We will identify the stations for you.
We're going to do one station for this period, but guess what? We're going to move on to the others. So if you got a favorite you want to get to, we'll get to them. They're all the same.
And it does happen if you
And
see.
they're usually negative.
Yeah.
I think Channel 5 is
Channel 5 is about the worst of the lot.
But he's not even objective, he calls people's names.
Yeah.
Okay, now.
We think we may be trying to do 5 as well as 2 on this project. So I think some of you will be happy to hear that.
Is a reporter supposed to give his or her opinion?
No, and when they do, usually when it's very obvious, they will actually put commentary. If the station is worth any journalistic integrity, and they will actually do that. They'll put commentary. But a lot of these stations nowadays are so slipshod that reporters do put their personal spin on things.
But there is a difference. Some reporters, because of the way they covered stories and the number of awards that they've received, they become assigned to stories like that.
Natural.
So they be,
Okay, here
12
you go.
years after he shot 4 people on a New York City subway, Bernhard Getz is back in court this noon. Getz is being sued for $50 million by Darrell Cavey, who was paralyzed in the shooting. Channel 2's Mike Taibbi is live at Bronx Supreme Court. Mike.
just 1 minute.
Is there a pause button?
Yes, there is.
Might be the final chapter of the Berlion saga. The preliminaries today, the jury
There's
selection
no
begins
pause
on
button.
Wednesday for this civil
Just
suit.
stop.
Back
Stop.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds exciting.
One of the things to note is that this introduction that McGee gave is a legitimate introduction. She told the story exactly the way it's supposed to, in journalistic terms. She gave the who, what, why, with no flavor. There was nothing added to it to embellish or enhance it. She said 4 people. Now,
12 years ago.
12 years ago, it would have been 4 thugs or 4 muggers. So I want you to know that in this course of what we're doing and what we've been doing over the 12 years, we've been working, it's not politically correct, we have moved them back to the point when they come to stories that are controversial, that involves race, that they do not tinge it. So when she said 4 people, that was a decent, that was a fine intro. And then she said Bernard, Canby, what's his first name?
Darrell Cavey.
Darrell, that he is paralyzed. So you have the whole story, and it was done just the way it should be. The question, and that, as Eric pointed out to you, that's called a lead-in. When you have the anchor person lead into the story, it's written by a writer sitting in the newsroom, and they write into the tape. The reporter, now, the Mike Taibbi piece. So when you look at the news, you need to listen to see if the lead-in has been written as crisply and clearly as hers.
And dispassionately.
And
objectively.
objectively, yes.
What did you say
One of the writers, a news writer in the newsroom.
The instructions that you're giving us now, you're gonna give them to us again?
Well,
on
yes,
paper?
yes. But this is a chance for you to just go with the flow and we'll give you helpful hints.
There are also what's called tags at the end of the story after the reporter throws it back to the anchor person. After the reporter signs off and says, back to you, Mr. McGee, or whatever. Then they either segue to another story, or they do a button punchline, which is called a tag, to put it into that story. And sometimes, as your friend John Rowland and other folk will do, there will be all kinds of interpretive nuances put to those tags. So the lead-ins and the tags are also things you have to pay attention to. Because that puts a spin on what they're projecting to you, the viewing audience. Okay?
This piece written by, reported by Taibbi's, was that written by a writer?
No, he wrote that himself right there in the
okay.
field.
All right.
He did his research, he did his homework before he went out to cover that. That's why, and they dug up some of the subway file footage that they shot back in 1984. You can tell that that's 1984 file footage. But you can, one of the things that gets to be problematical, that's confusing for you, a viewer, is this report was put together so sloppily. Let's just talk about actual editing for a news piece. He talks about Bernard Getz had this to say. We heard from a so-and-so Bernard Getz, and you saw a picture of Darrell Cavey in a wheelchair in a hospital. And you saw Darrell Cavey saying nothing. So automatically you're confused. You expected to see Bernard Getz, and you're seeing Darrell Cavey. Then when Darrell Cavey disappears, Ron Kuby comes up. This is Cavey's lawyer. And Kuby says something that's totally not...
That's Cavey's lawyer?
That's Cavey's lawyer. Kuby is Cavey's lawyer. There's a lot of similarities in names. Now, Kuby says something that's really within the defense of why he's suing for $50 million. But that was never led up to by any of Taibbi's writing. And so what he led up to should have been a soundbite coming from Bernard Getz, which comes third. And so by the time you're through with all that, you're so confused, you don't know what's going on. So not only is it poorly edited, but it has all these phraseology in it that's fighting itself about set upon, he says, alleged muggers. Well, if they set upon him, then they were trying to mug him if they set upon him. So if they set upon him, that has a connotation of they assaulted him. You know, they didn't just walk up to him. I mean, if they set upon him, that means there's an action going on. But then he turns in mid-phrase to say what he says are alleged muggers. So that just confuses the viewer even more. It confuses the issue of, hey, was Bernard Getz really assaulted? Were they really muggers? And so you're still confused. You know, it's pretty bad reporting. Go ahead.
I noticed, since you were on the subject, I was listening to WNID this morning, and they mentioned some, I think it was a story that Marlon Brendel mentioned the same thing that Professor Jeffrey said, and there were other people calling and saying, oh, we've been looking all over for the newspaper over the weekend to see what's, going to happen.
You didn't find that story, did you?
They said, well, CNN, such a report story in the New York Post about it. He was, he couldn't take it. Because it was unbelievable, because it was the same thing was mentioned about, how the Jews manipulate the
Jews are running Hollywood.
Hollywood.
Before he said that, though, he had said some pretty good things. So I guess that's why nobody made such a big issue, because he did compliment them before he trashed them.
It wasn't not against Brendel, but it was just a comment,
Yes, thorough reporting calls for thorough reporting. And so therefore, if he gave a total spectrum of what's going on, then they shouldn't just say he said this bad thing, he said this. But usually it's the negatives or the sensational that the news organs will go for. And see, that's why we've started this project, to start documenting how the news is skewed, how it's not reported properly or in depth, and that's why we're requesting your help in doing this, because we want the regular viewers out here, not just the professionals like ourselves, to start actually documenting and helping us to complain to the FCC and other interested parties about this, because the only way it's going to change is if we keep the spotlight on it, and in the case of television, if we have enough written complaints to still challenge their license renewal, because right now that's still a provision they're trying to give it away, but that's still a provision that these airwaves are still owned by the people, and they still have to be licensed, and you can challenge those licenses.
I called this over the weekend, or last week actually, Amy Burns, former CUNY law dean, was killed in South Africa. And I called the news stations to complain about the fact that nothing was said about this great man and the tragedy to our community. They said, well, we can't put everything on.
Yeah,
I
right.
said, but you put other stuff on, and you talk about other losses. In the New York Times, when they did an article on him, it was all the way in the D section.
Well, the obituaries usually run in the back, but when somebody like Ron Brown dies, it goes up front.
Yeah.
So what you're dealing with is the editor of the New York Times who says, is he as large as Ron Brown? Should he be up here, or do we put him with his space where we normally run obits? And you're fortunate, we refer to this community, that they even took the time in the New York Times to give him his due, because when Mal Good passed away, who was a pioneer in breaking the color barrier in television, he barely got this in the New York Times, or, it was just appalling,
So it's not even that they manipulate, it's even that they omit stuff.
Thank you. Bottom line is, we don't count, and until we hit them in the pocketbook economically, we will continue to not count as far as they're concerned. That is the only language that they understand, is economics, for real. I mean, that's the basic understanding of the nature of the business.
What are 3-second sound bites? What's that?
3-second sound bites? Well,
There's no such thing as a 3-second soundbite.
Wait,
Just
What's a soundbite?
Okay, the first to use the word to death, a sound bite is literally, it's called an actuality, or it is you talking and your voice, your likeness being used. That's a sound bite.
See, Bernard Getz, when he said, well, we didn't want to do this, but X, Y, and Z, blah, 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 that's a sound bite. See, Ronald Kuby, the lawyer, when he said, this man took out an illegal gun, shot this man in the back, and that's what he said, that's a sound bite. The reason I said there's no such thing as a 3-second sound bite is, in 3 seconds, you can only get like half a word out, and then you're gone.
It's a 30-second.
But 30-second sound bite, what television news has done is reduce most comments that are supposed to have a bearing on a news story to those short snippets of sound. And there's no way you can get any in-depth analysis of anything in 30 seconds. Okay?
But now, before we take you so far, as you
We
can
need
tell,
to get back to where we are.
Eric is giving you the colors of it, and it's very important for you to have this, because without this foundation, you may find the assignment to be boring, and we want to avoid that. In regard to the sound bites and how the news is presented, looking at the 12 o'clock news, 5 o'clock news, any of the news programs, it is a business. First and foremost, it is a business. And the hour clock or the half-hour clock is spread out, and each second is counted for $1. So that just to get to we had the bumper at the top, and then there were at least
Bunch of commercials, right after the
at least
bumper.
4 or 5, 30, 60. Now the advertisers pay for it. If they want 30 seconds, they pay for 30 seconds. If they want 60 seconds, they get 60 seconds. But the news clock, the way the news director and the program director designed that, they had X minutes of news and then X minutes of paid time. So the stories get shorter, so that when you get a 30-second, it's either you're going to get a direct reporter, like you'll have the anchor person read, and she reads 4 lines, that's 30 seconds. 4 lines equals 30 seconds. No picture, no reporter. That gives them enough time to go into the field, a live shot, with Mike Taibbi. But again, her job as the anchor is to keep you there. They give her 10 seconds, like she did, 10 seconds worth of copy, and then to the reporter, who is allowed X number of sound bites, depending on how he did it. And was, as Eric pointed out, sloppy because they wasted his time by showing visuals with no sound. And they did not allow for any, he did not do any work, he did not get any live. The news director wanted to he was supposed to get, if he was live on the scene, he should have gotten one of the principals, be it Bernard Getz, be it Ronald Colby,
or the DA.
Or the DA. He got none of that. So what you, going back to your question, when you see a story, please be cognizant of the time and how they use the time.
The other thing is you have within a half-hour newscast, if it's a half-hour show, you know, I think the local shows run like 5 to 6, and then 6 to 6:30. Is that what's going on these days?
Yes, correct.
They do a 1 hour 5 to 6, and then they do a
Half
6
an
to
hour,
6:30.
right.
And the 6 to 6:30 really is the prime newscast. The 5 to 6 is the filler, where they throw in a lot of features, and they throw in a lot of what we call back of the book things, and we do a lot of entertainment stuff, and you know, who's in town and what's on this and the other. But that 6 to 6:30 is the prime drive time or evening newscast for the local station. And then on the networks, they come up behind them at 6:30 to 7 or something like that. And then, of course, they have their, on the independent stations in this market, the 10 o'clock newscast is their prime newscast because they don't do a 6 o'clock or a 5 o'clock. So they run a 1 hour show from 10 to 11. And so that becomes their prime broadcast where they squeeze every major story in. Within the half hours of these broadcasts, you're talking about 23 minutes maximum of news. The other 7 are commercials and station IDs and bumpers for the shows that are coming on that night. So you're never going to get more than 23 minutes worth of news in a half hour. And then in the next half hour, you get another 23 minutes. It's an hour show. But they'll run between 7 minutes of commercials and bumper station IDs. So know that going in. And then also understand that the importance of a story is determined by how high up it is in the broadcast.
How soon do you see and hear?
If you lead the broadcast with that news story, that is your major story of the day. And reporters in the field always want the lead story because that means that's the most important story of the day. And so they like those assignments that are the lead stories and the breaking stories of the day. So that gives you a sense of what that news director or that executive producer for that particular show considered the most important and the prime story of that day for his newscast. How high it is, how early it comes up in the broadcast. Okay, so keep those all in mind because it gives you an idea. It was story number 1, it was story number 2, it was story number 3, or of the 7, 8, 12 hours, because sometimes they squeeze a bunch of stories in by making them more short, and then some stories require more time, and so they will actually give it more time. But when one story gets a big chunk of time, like the Unabomber might get a whole lot of time, or Ron Brown's plane crash might get a whole lot of time, that means other stories down the broadcast get chopped shorter and shorter. They have to compensate because that 23 minutes is fixed because those commercials are not going away, okay? The commercials never get slashed. The news stories get slashed. Any other questions? You want us to finish on this broadcast?
I
Or?
was going to ask you, what about the OJ, when OJ was running, they were chasing OJ on the highway, and
That
everything
becomes
was-
a special.
Oh,
What
that's-
that becomes is a television event. Okay, now that was not a news story. That was a television event. Okay?
Special presentation.
And they will choose to do that. Now, I mean, a lot of folk were upset. I was upset. I was listening to New York Knicks. And the reason I was upset was because all they were doing on the air was speculating with absolutely no known facts. And so They're wasting my time. As a journalist, I was totally incensed. Just as a viewer, I was incensed. So I don't know how the rest of you felt about that. I mean, they could have said, okay, he's doing X, Y, and Z, and then go on back to the programming, and then later give you a news report that this occurred, this happened, this is what we know, and that would have been a perfect newscast, and they would have had a little bit more in-depth information instead of sitting there watching this vehicle ride up and down a highway, speculating, well, we think he may be lying on the floor, or his buddy says he may have a gun. We really don't know what's happening, but our helicopter will be coming around the corner, will give us a better shot. I'm telling you, that's all you were hearing. I mean, as a news person, that was like the Gulf War. That was the most non-event television I've ever seen. They spent more time putting more nothing on the air during the Gulf War than any other event. That was so costly and so useless to the American public. I mean, what did you all learn watching all those hours of watching the desert sand?
They didn't show us anything.
Thank you. And you know why? They had a pool situation where they would only take you where they wanted you to go anyway. So to spend that kind of money to not put news on the air was, for me as a news person, because I've spent my entire adult life, except when I was in the military, in the news business. So to watch that and have people try to tell me that's news, I found seriously appalling. I don't know what the rest of the general public thought of that, but I was totally depressed.
That's because they wanted to put forth a certain, just like with OJ, when they want to put forth, a certain attitude or perception. They wanted people to support the idea of the Gulf War. They wanted people to condone what Bush had done. And they also wanted to criminalize OJ, regardless of whether or not he did. I'm not talking about that, but just the idea. So, as you said, with them doing all that speculating, they were able to do that. And for half of America that was watching that, people had formed opinions.
Images are powerful.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. That's why we're here. You just brought us back to focus on
Okay, and before move, in regard to when you see what it's called a breaking story, and X amount of time is given, and you want to know what happens to the commercial, the commercials are bumped, and they have to go through, and that becomes administrative headache. It's no longer the news department just says forget the commercials, dump the commercials, and then you have the sales department finding spots to play those commercials. Those are make goods, and they get
That's
free
exactly
time.
what
and
they're
some
called,
other-
make goods. Because you have to make good on the commercial time that you just axed when you did those breaking special reports, which is what they call them. They preempt all programming, and all programming includes those commercial times. And so those special reports then become the broadcast for that evening or that day.
But how, okay, preempt, like when Ron Brown, not even when we knew he died, when the plane went down, it came in between whatever was on TV. And
You got the first special
they didn't-
report.
Right, the first special report broke in.
Yes.
So they didn't bump it, there was nothing to bump.
No,
Because they didn't,
she asked the question, what happens when you see something like the OJ chase, and they just kept it on the screen for all of that time. For every second, there was a commercial or something bumped, and then you have to make good. When they break in, they're literally breaking in, and so if there's a commercial schedule, then they will find another spot to put that in.
I think what you're referring to is if it happened during a news broadcast. Is that when it happened?
While she was watching a program.
yeah, whatever was on Mickey and Mike, something, I don't know, whatever was on, they, it was in the middle of Mike saying and they cut it.
Correct.
And well, the way I visualize it is whatever's going on in the background is still going on, but they're coming on with a
Right.
special report. So therefore, in that case, nothing is bumped, right?
It depends
But
on
the
the
viewer
slot.
doesn't see
You don't know.
what should have been there. Like if you were in mid-sentence and I cut into your sentence, they never hear the second half of your sentence. They see the reporter in the field reporting on the plane crash. Were you a taped broadcast and they wanted to make sure the viewer got what you were saying, they would then replay what you were interrupted in later. But what usually happens is they never replay that.
Exactly.
So that's what got bumped, you see,
And
what
if-
you were saying.
And if it's a commercial that got bumped, then
It
they
would
have to
get
make it up.
rescheduled.
But like if
That
it's a
would
soap
get
opera,
rescheduled.
they just let the opera keep running, so, you know, it's damn the
Soap opera's
public.
gone, but the commercial,
they'll make up.
that's right, you know why? That company has paid them something like $30,000 for that 30-second, maybe more. And so they can't just put that $30,000 in their pocket without honoring that airtime. Otherwise, they'll get sued. And so they have departments to deal with make goods. And the companies understand that breaking news will cause these things to happen. And that's the risk they run by placing ads in that medium.
So here's a silly question. What if they...
No question is silly.
The same way how they would bump it in the middle of TV, if they bumped it, I mean not bumped it, if they interrupted during the middle of a commercial, will they still have to find a place to rerun that commercial?
Yeah, if the commercial didn't air in its full entirety. That's a make good because they bought 30 seconds, they have to get 30 seconds. They bought 60 seconds, they have to get 60
But
seconds.
if it's a major story, they can negotiate that, and they can tell them, they'll either add on something. It's a business, that's why I said it leaves the newsroom.
When they say make good,
It's like if
they
it's
may
like
say,
15
listen, we're going to
seconds.
give you an extra 30 in this show in a primetime audience to make up for that.
But you,
And the company says, oh, okay, that's fine, we'll deal with that.
Oh, okay.
but you've never seen them break into a commercial.
Yeah, I was just about to say,
Yeah,
have they
no,
ever, I've never
because-
seen it.
In that helter-skelter, if you're managing the news, there's a program person who comes out. When a breaking story
It's
occurs,
very easy to just wait for that 30-second
seconds to
commercial to
go by.
go, because it's only like another 30 seconds. See, those commercials are so short, that's why you see so many of them. They just cram all of them together. So after that first 30-second goes, you go, boom,
and then into
your
the
break goes. Now,
All right, so now
We'll deal with-
we're back to
we're gonna
the
take
tape.
the back end of this show.
And wait, let me, just before we go, do
Rewind
you
it.
understand that we have moved, first you know how the story is led into. McGee Hickey, as the anchor person, she is like the point guard on the basket. She's the one to distribute the ball and the information. She did it the way it's supposed to be done. She gave you a clean representation, and now she's kicked it to the reporter in the field. That reporter is calling the shot. He is the field producer of this story. Okay, so there's a different kind of expectation. Your question was, are reporters supposed to be objective? Because he's covered this area so often, and this is when you do this, when you do this project, it's extremely important for you to know about the reporter. He's not a general assignment reporter at this time. He has covered crime and the court scene. And so they give him a little bit of space to improvise, and that's why he said Bernie, which is shop talk.
And it's also because he's a veteran reporter that he gets those assignments. Like most young reporters, when they get thrown a story, they'll go, well, at the Bronx courthouse, blah, 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 Mike Tabby says, yeah, McGee. He didn't say, I mean, it's like a conversational thing because he's done it so many years that he's not nervous about going live. And so he goes into almost slang when you throw that, yeah, it's a real rainy day out here in front of the Bronx courthouse. Don't let that deceive you because what he says next is quite crucial to what he's reporting and how he reports it, how accurate he is. So rewind it over there. No, we're up here. Rewind the play. See where we are.
Theodore Moore, 12 years ago, December 22nd, 1984, verdict.
Here's the text.
Shot 4 people on a New York City subway. Bernhard Goetz is back in court this noon. Goetz is being sued for $50 million by Darrell Cavey, who was paralyzed in the shooting. Channel 2's Mike Taibbi is live at Bronx Supreme Court. Mike.
Yeah, McGee, on a raw day in the Bronx, the beginning of what might be the final chapter in the Bernie Goetz saga. The preliminaries today, the jury selection begins on Wednesday for this civil suit. It all goes back to an incident which is famous and now part of New York lore. 12 years ago, December 22nd, 1984, Bernie Goetz gets on a downtown IRT subway train. He is set upon by what he says are 4 muggers who are trying to shake him down for $5. He pulls out an illegal Smith & Wesson nickel-plated .38 and opens fire. And according to his statement and mythology about this, he then says to one of the men who's down, Darrell Cavey, "You don't look so bad, have another," and fires away, paralyzing the youth. This is the lawsuit William Kunstler had represented the Cavey family. Now it's Ron Kuby. We heard from him a while back, and we also heard from a rambling Bernard Getz.
Yeah, see?
Bernard Getz was motivated by racism.
Okay, that's
he made
all
that
bad.
quite clear.
Can't
And he
do a
took
stop.
out an illegal handgun, walked up to a young man who posed no threat to him, said, "You don't look so bad, here's another one," and fired a shot point blank into his back, severing his spine.
It's something that I don't want to do, but I have the choice of either taking the summary judgment
And
or
no,
fighting it.
What is the,
You know, I agree.
See,
what is
that
the-
soundbite right there was what was supposed to come up when he said, "We heard from a rambling Bernard Getz. It's something we don't want to do, da, 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 da." That's what was supposed to come. And you would not have been so confused had that come. What came up was that file footage of Darrell Cavey in the hospital bed or in the wheelchair in either the hospital room or wherever they moved him to for rehab, followed by Ron Kuby, then finally by Bernard Getz. And so that's part of your confusion.
So why did they show up speaking? Because he was saying.
Why didn't KB?
Yeah, why didn't?
Because the way Tybee wrote the report, he didn't call for Darrell Cavey to say anything. See? And he didn't even write the report well enough to set up the soundbite from KB's lawyer, Ron Kuby. That just came up as a surprise to myself, you, and everybody else in this room, because he did not lead into it with anything to put it in the context. And he easily could have, based on what he had said prior to it, you see.
I think that, going back to what Mr. Lee was saying, as far as when you have a reporter on scene, they are supposed, I mean, you're saying it's bad when they don't see somebody? You know, like, are standing there with somebody with a mic? You know?
Absolutely. Firstly, it's fooling the public to believe that this is happening now and your reporter is live. This is part of the grand deception that's going on. When you have the reporter out at 12 o'clock at night, well, the 11 o'clock news.
He was up at Brown's Courthouse this morning, just prior to this 12 noon.
He is obligated to get sound.
Right. What we don't know, the way this thing is edited, is whether that Ron Kuby soundbite was gotten today by Mike Taibbi, or whether that's a file soundbite from 12 years ago. My gut feeling is because Kuby's hair is a little more silvery than he was 12 years ago, that was probably gotten today. But we should not have to speculate about that, you see? So he should have written into it properly. It should have been properly edited so that you would have known that he could have easily said, as KB's lawyer said not 10 minutes ago, boom. And you would have had it. You would have known when he got the bite. You would have known that it was KB's lawyer. And, you know, so this is really, it's not so much that it's a poor report. The elements are there. It's that it's edited in such a backwards fashion, it turns it into a poor report. And the reason why KB is there is because they wanted file footage of KB so you could know what he looked like 12 years ago, because you just saw him today with the glasses in the wheelchair going, which was other file footage. And the reason I know that's today is because, yeah, I can tell. I had KB's brother shoot Darrell KB in the hospital room with a hidden camera when this story broke 12 years ago. Nobody had seen Darrell KB paralyzed. Nobody knew what state he was in. I was working for 2020 at the time, and we needed to put a face to the name and to the kid who had heard those words, "You don't look so bad, here's another for you." So I met the mother, I met the brother, I talked to them, and I said, look, I suspect that your son is going to come out looking like just any other hoodlum and any other kid if we don't get folk to at least see who he is and what he looks like. And his younger brother took it. His mother initially tried to do it, she just couldn't do it. So I said, all right, is it all right if your son does it? And his kid brother.
Why couldn't you do it?
Camera. Huh?
Why couldn't you do it?
Because they would never let a camera in that hospital. You see? So the nature of the beast was, how do I get a picture of him? I get a picture of him by putting it in the camera and having one of his relatives go in. We were only going to let relatives visit him anyway. That was the other key thing. And his kid brother got the shot for us. That's a very well recovered KB that you saw out there. Initially, he was really just stretched out in the bed. I probably still have tape of KB right after that shooting in my personal files at home. There are certain things that I just don't give up when I get them because of the nature of the business. But,
Do you pay the family? for
we
that
actually
information?
didn't pay the family per se because the policy is not to buy news, but we did do some nice things for them just because we knew it was an imposition, for real. But there are times when I will impose on people when I think it's for their own good and for the greater good of telling the story. And I will explain to them. I mean, his mother was very reluctant. And I said, let me ask you something. You know your son better than anybody else out here. He may have been running with the wrong group of kids right now, but is he really this kind of kid? Is he really a mugger? He said, no, not really. I can't speak for my son when he's out there with his friends. And this kid that he's running with, I don't think is a very nice boy anyway. But he had a minor juvenile thing that was very, very, yeah. It was very, very, very tough. And I checked on this because, you know, I grew up in Harlem. I mean, I've had guns put to my head when I was 11, 12 years old. So I'm not in very good sympathy with folk who run around holding folk up and trying to do bad things. But I also understand that the nature of our business is we tend to demonize folk by not finding out who they are. So anytime I get into a kind of situation like this, I try to find out who I'm dealing with and who my family is so that we can try to tell the story as accurately as possible. If I found out this kid was no good, I wouldn't have done what I did. I'd say he got what he deserved, and I would walk right away from it. For real. Because if you get what you deserve, because you're out there trying to mess with people, then yeah, you got what you deserve. But I don't think this kid got what he deserved the way Bernie Getz did. When you pull your trigger and you basically taking yourself out of harm's way, then you're out of harm's way. To go up to somebody and say, well, you don't look too bad, here's another one. Well, let me tell you, that wasn't, that wasn't right. So,
Why they wait so long to follow
the legal justice system in this country is atrocious. I mean, you can do civil action and it'll take you 7 years. And so if I sued ABC for age discrimination, which I thought about doing, and I left in 1980, I thought about doing it, I didn't. I could have. When I resigned in 1988, if I had filed a suit, it would have been last year before that suit would be coming in the federal court. It takes 7 years minimum. And that's just on one of these discrimination things. You're talking a $50 million lawsuit, civil suit with all kinds of stuff. I mean, they do all kinds of delaying tactics and this and that, and it took 12 years. Okay? That may be speedy for all I know. But it's not like they weren't trying to get this suit filed. It was filed quite soon after that.
And it has to be filed within the statute of limitation, which is probably only 2 years. So that's going to be 13 years.
Yeah. I mean, they filed that suit like right after that verdict came down, you know. Oh, that's between the lawyer and the family and everything. You talk about it. What enters into it is what's his possible gainful employment, what's his value to his family. They do all. They actually have weights and tables and stuff like this in the insurance business and stuff. You know.
Is there any like large established organization that, aside from the FCC, that tries to monitor, you know, the media?
There are organizations like what's the IRE?
It's fair, media and accuracy.
And there are a number of organizations around the country, but they're all private, except for the ones that are connected to some of the universities. But within the federal government, there's only the FCC that deals with it.
To piggyback on that, with the media period, by now it should be well-known knowledge that people are scrutinizing what is being said. So, you know, don't they have people, like when it's edited?
No, okay, but you remember there was earlier on, Eric mentioned that not until communities like ours that are abused start to deal economically with the issue will there be change. Business is business. So that when you have the film editor, and I'm just thinking now, there's a pending strike at CBS with the Writers Guild, and I'm not sure whether or not that impacted on that report.
Are they out already?
This weekend, the clock is up, exactly. For whatever it's worth, since that was the midday news, they may right now have somebody in there who is not experienced enough to put together. Because Mike is there and the Bronx. He knows that they're going back to the studio to roll in that tape. That tape is not with Mike out on location. So he says, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, 15 seconds into my roll tape.
Right.
He knows that he's got 15 seconds, he did the top, roll tape.
See, when you hear this word,
Right, the out cue.
this is your cue, punch the button.
Exactly.
And you roll the tape.
So now, the person who cuts tape is not the journalist, not in all cases. When the reporter goes out and has a chance to put the story together, they come back and they sit down with the tape editor and they tell them what to pull out.
Right, but just like how you said, the lady, the anchor woman,
Yes.
how her lead was well done.
Right, because she had a writer.
Right, so don't these writers, my question is, these writers know that, you know, communities are scrutinizing them.
No, they don't care.
No, they don't care. No.
Let me put it this way. It all depends on who they are and how experienced they are and what deadlines they're under.
Exactly.
Now, deadlines in the news business tend to make for all kinds of bad things. Sometimes inadvertently, sometimes they don't care. But when you're under pressure to make a particular broadcast, it's how fast can you put it together, how accurately can you put it together, but it better be put together. That's really the bottom line. The nature of what makes journalists good in this business and last is how quickly you can work under pressure and work accurately, quickly under pressure. Now, when you make a lot of mistakes, they fire you, unless you got godfathers and godmothers in high places. When you make mistakes, but it's not against folk that they are highly concerned about, you tend to last a little longer. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, the Jewish community has a very high lobby, very potent. You make a mistake about anything in their community, the phones ring off the hook, they write a lot of letters, and so you make too many mistakes about their community, you run the risk of being called on the carpet quite often. I don't blame the Jewish community for doing that. I think that's what every community needs to do. And that's what I want our community to become focused about doing. We harangue amongst ourselves, we don't harangue them. And we need to harangue them in an organized manner. And that's why we're launching this project. So I think we need to turn this back to fact. I think you want to talk about this forum. We don't have.
Did she give you the time?
I don't know. Are we running out of time?
No.
Okay. All right. You want to finish up on this?
Yeah,
so
yes.
talk some
There's
more?
a grievance thing.
Okay, we're going to do some more.
Bernard Getz says that he doesn't have $50 million. He went through $250,000
Yes.
for the estate that he inherited, but he does expect to fight this. He expects the trial to last between 10 days and 3 weeks. In the Bronx, by the way, jury verdicts 79% in favor of plaintiffs, much higher than 57% nationwide. The trial begins, as I say, with jury selection on Wednesday. This is Mike Taib reporting live from the Bronx, back in the studio.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Now, that is subjective reporting. He did it very slick, it was very slick on his part. He ended his piece with Bernard Getz giving, he was the spokesperson at that point.
For Bernie.
Bernie says he doesn't have the money.
That's it.
See, now, if you are watching this on a regular, you start this is where the soft sell was. He came right back after showing all those unrelated clips of Canby. But then he closed. Your last, if you walked into the room and you saw, you know it's Bernard Getz. I heard Bernard Getz, and now he said
Who's
he's
your
pleased.
sympathy with when he's
Bernard
done?
Getz. and then he went on to do something more egregious. Right.
There you go. That's
He
what I was
gave
waiting
his-
to get to.
Exactly. That was. Then he took the next step with the statistics. He said the Bronx juries tend to rule in favor of the plaintiffs, and then he said the jury will be impaneled next week or whenever, later this week, this time. So he now leaves the viewer with, not only have I told you how Bernard feels about this, you know that Bernard is probably not going to get a fair shake. Now, he could very well say that as an objective reporter reading the scene. He could say Bernard Getz, but he had no business, firstly, he had no business ending the story with Bernard Getz's sentiments about what was happening. Then he tells you, now don't forget that the Robert Johnson issue is still very real and very raw. The Bronx DA.
He just calls the Bronx, the Bronx. Jury's in the Bronx.
Jury's
in the Bronx.
Exactly.
It's interesting. You see, now, you cannot fault him for giving you statistics, okay? Now, he doesn't need to give you statistics in this story about how often who wins and in what capacity, and comparing to the national average. He could also have compared it to the 5 boroughs, okay? You might find out that in Queens, juries may tend to convict 97%, but you don't know that, do you? Because he didn't tell you that, okay? He just told you that the Bronx percentage was higher than the national, which implies that people in the Bronx are more prone to plaintiffs who come from the Bronx or whatever, and so Bernie does not stand a very good chance, and we should maybe move his trial. All this is implied in these statistics. What he should have, in comparison, say is, as opposed to Manhattan, Queens, and so-and-so, the Bronx, da-da-da-da-da. So you have a citywide yardstick to go by. Then you can take that yardstick and say, New York on the whole is this much above the national average or this much below the national average. You don't do it as selectively as he just did. And the bit about, well, Bernard Getz says he doesn't have $250 million, that's just totally unnecessary. That's really electioneering and campaign.
I'm seeing a couple of parallels. Seeing that they want to move the stadium out of the Bronx, that's in the news these days. And by him saying, listen, the statistics for the Bronx is like this, it implies that yes, there's a majority, and he said these cases. What is these cases?
Presumably, as a reporter, he's referring to civil suits for...
But he should say that.
But he should say that.
Yeah, he said these cases. So I'm assuming that he meant a minority, whatever.
Yeah, see now, that's what a lot of the other bureaus will also imply, as opposed to civil suit, which is why he should have said these types of civil cases on so-and-so.
Also, seeing that Getz doesn't have the money and he loses, how does KB get his money?
He gets as much about Bernie Getz as he can.
Oh.
That's really the bottom line.
Okay.
I think there was another one.
What do you know what nationality Mike Tyson is?
What is the type? I'm not sure. I'm not, when I knew him, 15, I guess about 15 years ago, I don't think I ever got into where he was from or where his folks were from. That's a name that could be anything from Hawaiian to Greek to Italian to, it could be anything, really. You just can't tell by the name. You can't tell by looking at it. It could be Middle Eastern.
Does ethnicity play a great part in it?
Well, here's the thing that I tell most people when I do panel discussions. Not only does ethnicity, being black, being Polish, being Italian, whatever, we all bring personal baggage to whatever profession we're in. Don't let anybody tell you you don't. We all do. What we strive to do as real professional journalists is to understand that we bring that with us and still try to tell every story fairly. Now, you can tell a story objectively and you just use facts and still not tell the story fairly. That's why I don't say you tell a story objectively. Because in the use of language and in semantics, you can be objective as heck and still paint a picture that will make something be other than what it is. Correct. So objectivity is not the goal. Fairness is the goal, because when you're fair, you're trying to do justice to all sides and all people. And I don't ever say both sides, because I've learned as a journalist that there's no such thing as just two sides to every story, unless it's he's alive or he's dead. All right? I mean, after that, you got a serious problem in interpreting data and finding out who's giving you real knowledge, hearsay knowledge, to the point where you have to do a lot of sifting. And it is your job as a reporter or as a producer or as a professional journalist to sift to the best of your knowledge. And when you've done all that, you may still not have a hard and fast answer. But when you try to tell what you have sifted to the best of your ability to be fair to everyone, then you can walk home that day and not have to worry about anybody coming at you. But you can defend whatever you do. When I do reports, when I used to do reports for 2020, I would word everything as carefully as I could before a reporter then tried to rewrite my stuff. When the reporter rewrote my stuff, I say, you may be able to defend that, I can't defend that. I can defend this. When you rewrite this, make sure it comes out saying exactly what's here, so that when I have to defend it, I have every leg to stand on. I don't care if 10 people want to sue me. I know I can defend it. And I've had these kinds of discussions and conversations. Because you can rewrite something and it will sound almost the exact same way, but because of the semantics, you will not have a leg to stand on in a court of law because of just that small change in wording. And what it always boils down to, when you really want to scare them, is you can reword it that way if you want to, but that I will not try to defend in a court of law. This I will and can. As soon as you say that, they go, oh, okay, and they go back and they figure out another way to reword you, or they leave exactly what you've written the way you've written it. And that is my criteria. That's the only thing you can do. But once you can tell yourself that you tried to tell the story to the best of your ability, as fairly as you can, it doesn't matter. And I've been sued, and I have had people say that I have twisted things, and I've had to defend everything that ever came in question, and I was always able to defend it. I got sued on the Move story.
What?
Bombing in Philadelphia. Well, I used some photos. Now, the use of the photos was fine, and we got an agreement from the woman to use the photos. She agreed to it over the phone.
You got to tell it was the whole story.
You remember when the city of Philadelphia bombed itself? Well, we got, this is one quick war story. We got some photos, some still photos. Like I said, I always try to put a face to the people we're dealing with. And this was a series of black folk who had done some different things in that community. And we did the best we could to paint this portrait as accurately as possible. Not just telling Move's side, but telling the community side. Move totally harassed and wrecked that community. If I'd been living in that community, I might have gotten a gun and tried to shoot Move myself, based on what I found out. But I'm going to tell you, Move was driven to a lot of what it did because of the Philadelphia police and the bureaucracy on how they treated them. So there were a whole lot of wrongs snowballing into a lot of problematical situations. But to make a long story short, when Move built this compound, all you could see in moving video was this boarded up building in this row house community in the heart of Philadelphia. So you had no idea who these people were. This woman called us and said, oh, I've got pictures, some still photos of the people when they're building. I said, oh, okay, let's see them. She sent them up, sent us copies, and lo and behold, you could see brothers out there with their dreadlocks hammering and stuff, and you could put a face to the people. The pictures were a little bit soft. but usable. You know, they weren't crisp sharp, but they were usable. And I said, all right, listen, let's make a deal. And we negotiated. My associate producer, my co-producer, was from Philadelphia. We made a deal with this woman. She lived in the neighborhood, African-American female. And we agreed to an X number of dollars. And we said, okay, we're going to send you a telegram because this deal was consummated over the phone, like while we were putting the final touches on this thing. Because I edited them in there, but I said, if we don't get the okay, this stuff comes out, we go with the file footage of the boarded up thing without the stuff. Well, the director of operations was a Caucasian female who got on the phone to try to finish the negotiations with this African-American female that these two African-American producers made this deal with. She pissed that woman off so badly that the woman, even though she told us we could use the pictures and was going to sign the deal and said so, never signed the deal. And so after they used the photos, she filed suit. Oh. All right, she filed suit for $100,000. Now we made a deal to pay her, I guess maybe it was about $5,000 or something. I mean, it was not chump change for the fact that there were out of focus photos, and we're only going to use maybe 3 of them for, I guess, a total of about 10, 15 seconds, if that much. So she was going to make $5,000. It was pretty decent money for some soft pictures, and I was going to put a face to my story, part of my story. And so this suit came down the pipe for $100,000, and I said, who's suing us for $100,000 for the use of these photos? And the lawyer, a guy by the name of Steve Staccato, he said, well, Mrs. So-and-so down in, I said, no, she told us we could use the photos. We sent her the telegram confirming conversation. And she said, well, she evidently changed her mind. I said, well, what caused her to change? Well, we had to backtrack and find out and everything. We ended up, I think, either talking to the woman or talking to a friend of hers. And that's when we found out that this other woman had been so arrogant and so high and mighty with her. She just said, well, hell with you. And so we used the pictures thinking we had the right to use them, and she sued. Now, we had all kinds of depositions about the phone conversation because my producer and I were in the same room together. So we knew that she'd agreed, and we knew that we were dispatching the telegram and all that stuff. And so we were willing to go to court to prove that, because see, it impacts on your reputation when somebody says, oh, use those things without authorization and blah, blah, blah. You get a bad reputation. And, oh, that's the producer who did that and didn't have permission. And you don't ever want your reputation to be besmirched in this industry. So I'm ready to go to war. I said, no. I mean, I've been down these roads. I mean, that was a big, big, fat lie. We had an agreement. Well, we took depositions. We did all this legal stuff. Next thing I knew, they gave the woman $100,000. So I said, Steve, what? He said, look, Eric, we would have won the suit based on what you guys were going to be able to testify, et cetera, but it's going to take us 4 years. By the time we paid all our legal fees and she paid her legal fees, it's going to cost us more than $100,000. I said, so you paid her $100,000 just because it's going to be cheap? He said, yeah. I said, okay, next time I'm going to sue you guys for $100,000. But I mean, that's the nature of the beast that you're dealing with. I mean, they paid the woman $100,000 because in the final analysis, it was going to be cheaper to pay her the $100,000 than to actually try the suit. Bingo.
Now this particular story takes us back to an earlier question when you asked Eric if he had paid the family for the shots of Canby in the hospital. It is considered unethical in that sense because they are the news.
Right.
He is in the bed ill, and that family, they make up the news. You cannot stage the news. You cannot pay for the news. So in that case, for the station to pay for that would have been, that's unethical. If they allow for limousines to take
hard copy and current affair and all those folks, they'll go up to one of the jurors on OJ said, listen, when you go in there, I want you to be ready to sell us your story. Now, the juror is a part of that news story. Follow me? But even before they go into the jury box, these folks are already negotiating to buy their story. So they can say, exclusive on hard copy, juror number 9. Well, that's when you start to impact the news. So a juror goes in for a trial already knowing, well, I'm going to make money, so I better make sure I do and say anything I want to make sure I stay in here. So they're no longer functioning as just a citizen trying to deal with their duty as a juror on a court. They've been tampered with by some news organization.
Well, now, hard copy comes out of the news, Eric. Hard copy comes out of the news. If you look at an organization chart, you might see hard copy, but hard copy is not straight. That's feature, that's news, feature, / entertainment.
It's very hard to draw lines now because these shows have proliferated so much you can't even tell. See, talk shows at one time people used to consider public affairs because talk shows used to deal with serious issues. Well, guess what? I don't call talk shows public affairs anymore. I call it pure trash. I mean, I just don't. So you had a question?
I'm just curious, have y'all ever studied Channel 13?
13? Not as, because this is the first hard survey we're trying to do, but we look at them just as discreetly and discriminatingly as it is, and they fall into a lot of serious trouble. They did something just the other day on 13 that really annoyed me. They were talking about the latest upsurge in biblical translations and new Bibles that are being issued and the interpretation of the Bible. And they got all these scholars and all these ministers and people of the cloth to come talk about this. And they had one female, and they had one Episcopalian, they had denomination, they had a Greek, whatever. I see one black person, male or female. We got more churches, more religious folk, more everybody who know Bible, who've been through more theological seminaries, and there wasn't one person of color in that entire discussion. So now, what message does that send to Channel 13's viewing audience? Oh, we're a group of folk who don't care about biblical history, we don't care about religion, now, they probably never even thought to approach someone of color for that discussion, and never even considered the kind of message they were sending by the omission of a person of color. But when I saw the range of people, male and female, all white, I was totally incensed. It just totally annoyed me, because that's why we have in the media these images of our communities nothing but dope dealing, mugging, crime infested, when our community has a higher incidence of church going, church building, more churches per square block, per square area than any other community in North America. But you never get that image. And when they do a show like that, that just perpetuates that other side of the image. Your follow-up question?
Yeah, but that's one of the problems I find with them. They do give in-depth to whatever they cover, but I find like whenever they do cover something, they just put maybe that one token person there just to say, okay, I have a black, or maybe I have a, and
don't be afraid to write them too. The executive producer of the News Hour with Jim Laird is a fellow by the name of Lester M. Crystal, who I know personally. Les Crystal used to be at NBC umpteen years ago when I was on the assignment desk at ABC. And we did a lot of talking across the phones and all that. And he is a sensitive enough individual that you write enough of those letters, he'll say, hey, folks, we better start being a little bit more careful about this. So don't be afraid. Lester M. Crystal, executive producer. Yes, go ahead. And then you next.
So you don't write to, because I have written a letter to Charlene Hunter Gall about something.
Don't write
it to them.
You write the executive producer of the show, or whoever. See, because of the nature of Channel 13, they have general managers and presidents and stuff. But for that broadcast, I write Lester M. Crystal because he can make the change. He doesn't have to. It doesn't have to come from a president or a general manager.
What's his title?
He is the executive producer. He may have more than that, but that would get to him for sure. He's the executive producer of the News Hour. And young lady, you you had one.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, out of all the news broadcasts, or rather the stations, which ones do you feel at least make an attempt, you know?
I'll tell you what it is. Stations that have a high percentage of people of color working for them as on-air people and/or writers, assignment editors, tend to be less offensive than others. Now, the reason I phrase it as less offensive is because they're all bad, okay? And they're not bad because the people of color who work for them don't try to make them better. It's that a reporter is a reporter, and if he or she's out in the field covering one story that they're trying to make come out the correct way, there are about 8 other reporters over here doing something else that this other reporter can't really impact. As an assignment editor, I used to have serious trouble getting them to cover stories that I felt needed to be covered, and then when the coverage came back, trying to stay on top of what they were saying about those stories, because as an assignment editor, you don't really write the copy or edit it, but you do sometimes get a chance to see it. And if you've seen it on an early broadcast, you can say, hey, don't repeat that mistake on the next broadcast if you're going to do it again. So yeah, you try. And people of conscience that are in there try their best. We're going to try to do a general community forum, Agnes and myself on this Media Watch Committee, to talk to the population about how difficult it is to be a person of color working for one of these major news organs and trying to keep them on the straight and narrow, doing it by yourself in there without help from the outside community, and trying to let people know the kinds of internal struggles that go on that they really don't know about. And that because they don't see people on camera that they don't know about, that they need to know who those assignment editors are, who some of those writers are, so that they can start making some noise outside to make that battle inside a lot easier, which is another part of this program that we're working on.
And that's why my hand on that.
There's a question that you raised that I think that is not appropriate at this time. It is not for us to tell you which of the stations do a poor job. We are looking for this, for your viewing. Firstly, we are an association of black journalists, and our concerns are about the images of black people in the media. So when I say to you that we need for you to look at this as objectively as possible, based on the things that we're telling you, we know that there's a bias and it exists. But in order to correct the problem, we need for you to look at it and say, I am the viewer, and these things either take me over here or take me over there. Because if you take your prejudices to the task, we will not have the kind of documentation we need to really take forward and say, look, a panel of objective people who happen to be from the African American community monitored the news.
And fairness thing as a viewer. You see a very well done story. Give it the extremely positive and then tell them why in the description part.
Exactly.
Because we want the people who tell the stories well and do justice to us to be praised